I don't remember the exact first time my parents called me dumb, but I remember the feeling it left behind. It wasn't loud anger or a dramatic moment. It was something worse. Casual, repeated, almost normal in the way they said it, like it was a fact they had accepted long ago. "Don't expect much from him," my mother would say when guests visited. She never shouted it. She said it softly, almost politely, as if she was explaining a harmless truth. "He's not like the others," and my father would nod, sometimes smiling faintly, like he had already made peace with my failure. I grew up inside that version of myself they created, the dumb one, the one who didn't understand things quickly, the one who needed explanations twice, the one who always lagged behind. At school, I carried the same label without anyone even knowing my parents had given it to me first. Teachers would ask a question and then look past me, already expecting silence. When I did answer, even if I was close, the correction came with that same tone, patient, but disappointed, like I was trying hard but simply not built for it. Group work was the worst. I was always the last choice. If no one else was available, I was included out of necessity, not trust. I learned to stay quiet, not because I had nothing to say, but because every time I spoke, someone would interrupt or correct me halfway through. At home, it didn't get better. My siblings were everything I was not supposed to be. My older brother could memorize entire chapters in one reading. My sister always had perfect grades, perfect handwriting, perfect answers. My parents talked about them like they were achievements they had personally designed. And me, I was the contrast they used to highlight their success. "Why can't you be like them?" my father would ask, not always in anger, but in exhaustion. That exhaustion hurt more. It made me feel like I wasn't just disappointing. I was tiring to exist around. I started to believe them. Slowly, quietly, without even noticing it happening, I began to accept that maybe they were right. Maybe something in my mind just didn't work the same way. Maybe I really was slower. Maybe I was the mistake in an otherwise perfect pattern. I stopped raising my hand in class. I stopped asking questions at home. I stopped trying to explain myself when I was misunderstood. Every attempt felt like confirmation of what they already believed. The worst part was not the insults. It was the laughter that followed them. When relatives visited, I became a topic disguised as a joke. "He's special," my uncle would say, and everyone would chuckle. Even I would smile sometimes because I didn't know what else to do. It felt easier to laugh with them than to sit in silence while they laughed at me. But inside, something was forming. Not confidence, not hope, something quieter, confusion, because even though I was the dumb one, I noticed things. Patterns, systems, little details others ignored. I just never said them out loud. After a while, I stopped trusting those thoughts. If I was so incapable, then my observations must be wrong to right, so I buried them. I learned to shrink myself to fit the role they gave me. Still, at night, when the house went quiet, I would think, not about grades or expectations, but about why I felt so different from the version of me they described. Why my mind felt loud when I was alone, but silent when I was watched. I didn't know it then, but that silence was not emptiness. It was survival, and beneath all the labels, beneath every joke, beneath every disappointed sigh, I was still there. Watching, remembering, waiting for something I couldn't yet name. There is a strange kind of pain that doesn't explode. It settles. It becomes part of your daily routine, like breathing. That was my life after I accepted the label they gave me. I stopped fighting it out loud, but inside, something refused to fully die. If I was truly the dumb one, then why did my mind never feel quiet? That question followed me into my teenage years, even when I tried to ignore it. At home, nothing changed. My parents still compared me to my siblings, still used me as the example of what not to become. But by then, I had mastered something important: invisibility. I learned how to sit in a room without being noticed, how to nod at the right moments, how to avoid attention that only led to criticism. School became a place of routine survival. I wasn't trying to shine anymore. I was trying not to fail too loudly. My grades stayed average, sometimes worse. Teachers stopped expecting improvement, and I stopped offering it. But something else was happening in the background of my life. At night, when everyone thought I was asleep, I stayed awake. It started small, just curiosity. I would open old devices, broken phones, discarded laptops. I didn't have money for proper tools, so I learned from whatever I could find online. Tutorials, forums, random explanations that I barely understood at first. I failed constantly. Things didn't work. Systems broke, codes didn't run, ideas collapsed before they even formed properly, but I didn't stop. Because for the first time, failure didn't feel like humiliation. It felt like progress. In those quiet hours, I wasn't the dumb one. I was just someone trying again. I remember the first time I built something that actually worked. It was small, so small that no one would have cared even if I showed them. A simple digital tool I had been struggling with for weeks suddenly came alive on the screen. Nothing dramatic happened. No applause, no celebration, just a functioning result after endless mistakes. But I sat there staring at it longer than I should have. Because it didn't feel real. It felt like proof of something I had never been allowed to believe. The next morning, I made the mistake of mentioning it. I showed my father the screen, excited in a way I hadn't felt in years. I expected nothing big, maybe just a glance, maybe even confusion. But what I got was something sharper. He barely looked at it before saying, "Stop wasting time on these things. Focus on your studies. This won't take you anywhere." My mother didn't even turn around from what she was doing. "He always gets distracted," she added casually. That was it. No curiosity, no questions, no recognition, just dismissal. I nodded like I always did. I even smiled slightly so it wouldn't turn into an argument. But inside, something shifted, not anger yet. Something quieter, a decision forming without words. If they couldn't see value in what I was building, then I would stop showing them anything at all. That became my new rule: silence. From that point on, I worked in secret. Not for approval, not for attention, not even for revenge. I told myself it was just curiosity, just learning, just passing time, but deep down, I was changing. Every failure sharpened me instead of breaking me. Every late night taught me something new. I started recognizing patterns others missed. I began understanding systems not as difficult problems, but as puzzles waiting for patience. And slowly, something dangerous began to grow inside me. Confidence not loud, not visible, but steady. A hidden fire that no one in my house could see, because they never looked in the places it lived. To them, I was still the same, the quiet one, the slow one, the one who would figure life out later, if at all. But behind closed doors, I was building something they had never imagined possible. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering if they were right. I started wondering what would happen when they were wrong. The idea didn't arrive like a lightning strike or a sudden miracle. It came the way most life, changing things do quietly, almost annoyingly, repeating itself until I finally paid attention. At first, I ignored it. I had learned to doubt my own thoughts for most of my life, especially the ones that felt too big or unrealistic. People like me weren't supposed to have breakthrough ideas. That's what I was taught. But this one wouldn't leave. It kept returning every time I worked on small projects. Every time I noticed inefficiencies in systems people accepted without question. I started seeing patterns not as isolated problems, but as opportunities. Where others saw inconvenience, I saw structure waiting to be improved. Still, I didn't act immediately because fear is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers things like, "What if they were right about you all along?" So I tested it in silence. I built small versions of the idea, failed, rebuilt, failed again, adjusted, improved. I worked through nights where my eyes burned and mornings where my body felt heavier than my thoughts. There was no encouragement waiting for me, no one checking in, no one asking if I was okay, and strangely, that helped. Because I didn't have to explain myself anymore, then came the first breakthrough. It wasn't dramatic. There was no celebration, just a moment where something I built actually worked the way I intended, and not by accident, but by design. I remember sitting back, staring at the screen, realizing that for the first time, I wasn't guessing anymore. I was building something real. The first users came slowly, a handful at first, then a few more, then enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. People were using something I created, not because I was forced into it, not because I copied it, but because it solved something for them. That realization changed everything, but I still didn't tell my family, not yet, because I already knew what they would say. I expanded the idea further, refining it late into the night. I learned things I was never taught in school: how to scale systems, how to handle demand, how to think beyond survival and into growth. Every new problem that appeared didn't scare me anymore. It challenged me, and I answered it. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to expectations. I was setting direction. The turning point came when I realized the numbers were no longer small. What started as a simple project had become something that generated real attention. Then real income, then real investment interest. People I had never met began analyzing what I built, discussing it, valuing it in ways I had never imagined. And still, at home, nothing changed. I would sit at dinner listening to conversations about my siblings' achievements, my parents' pride in their successful children, while my phone quietly showed notifications that represented a completely different reality. A reality they couldn't see, or didn't want to. The gap between my two lives grew wider every day. In one, I was still the quiet disappointment. In the other, I was becoming something closer to what I had once been told I could never be: independent, capable, successful. Eventually, the numbers crossed a threshold I had never imagined for myself. Not thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but something far beyond what my old identity could explain. Still, I didn't celebrate loudly, because part of me was still waiting for someone to tell me it was a mistake. But no one did. Instead, the world kept confirming it. And slowly, painfully, I understood something I had never been allowed to believe. I was never the problem they thought I was. I was just building in silence while they were too busy laughing to notice the rise happening right in front of them. I didn't plan for them to find out the way they did. I always assumed that if my life ever changed, I would control the moment it was revealed carefully, deliberately, in a way that would protect whatever dignity I had left in their eyes. But life rarely waits for permission. It started with a conversation I wasn't part of. A relative had seen my name online, mentioned in an article, then another, then a growing trail of mentions that couldn't be ignored. Screenshots started circulating in family groups. Confusion turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into disbelief. And eventually, my phone rang. My father's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Not because I was afraid, but because I already knew the version of me he was calling about wasn't the one he had raised his voice at for years. "Yes," I said calmly. His voice came through differently this time, not sharp, not dismissive, uncertain. "Is it true?" he asked. What people are saying, is it you? There was a long pause after that question. A pause filled with everything he had ever assumed about me. I could have explained everything in detail. I could have listed achievements, numbers, milestones, validation from people he respected more than me. But none of that felt necessary. Yes, I said simply. Silence followed again. Then my mother's voice came in the background, shaky, almost breaking. "But how?" she asked, not accusatory this time, just lost. That single word carried years of contradiction. Years of labeling, years of certainty that I would never become anything worth noticing. I didn't answer immediately, because I realized something in that moment. They weren't just reacting to success. They were confronting the collapse of a story they had built about me since childhood. I worked, I finally said when no one was watching. Another silence, this one heavier. Within days, I was asked to come home. The same house, the same walls, but I walked into it differently, not as someone seeking approval, not as someone trying to prove a point, but as someone who no longer needed permission to exist beyond their expectations. They were waiting for me in the living room. My father looked older somehow, not in years, but in understanding. My mother avoided my eyes at first, like she was trying to reconcile two versions of reality at once. The dumb one they had raised, and the person standing in front of them didn't fit together in their minds. Finally, my father spoke. "We thought you couldn't do anything," he said quietly, not cruel, not loud, just honest in a way that hurt more than insults ever did. I nodded once. "I know." That was all I said, because there was nothing left to argue. My mother finally looked at me fully, her voice breaking slightly. "We didn't understand you." I almost smiled at that, not out of arrogance but out of recognition, because for years I had also not understood myself in the way I needed to. The difference was, I didn't stop trying. I reached into my bag and placed a document on the table. Not to impress them, not to shock them, but to make something undeniable. Numbers, valuation, proof. $47 million, not as a symbol of superiority, but as evidence of reality. No one spoke for a long time. I stood up slowly. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said, "and I'm not here to argue about the past." My father tried to speak, but stopped. I continued, "I spent most of my life trying to fit into the version of me you believed in. I'm not doing that anymore." The room felt still, not tense in the old way, but unfamiliar, like everyone was realizing they no longer understood the rules. I walked toward the door. Before leaving, I paused, not for drama, not for impact, just for closure. "I'm not the person you used to define," I said softly, "and I don't need you to agree with who I became." Then I left. No shouting, no revenge speech, no need to destroy what was already broken, because real revenge wasn't in proving them wrong with anger. It was in becoming so real, so undeniable, that their old version of me simply stopped existing.